So he comes on, he was like, yeah, well, Black people need to take care of themselves and build up their own stuff and do X, Y, and Z. But he's saying it in a way like he thinks, like he's telling me off, like I'm wrong. And so he goes in this whole diatribe. And when he finishes, I say, I agree with you. And he's like, yeah, but what you're not understanding is.
How do rational, sane, objective, ordinary people commit acts of atrocity?
You want to be connected to something that has a value and reality independent of your egocentrism.
You can't replicate that in an experiment. You're missing the point.
That's what meaning is.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Maxwell podcast. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Adam Coleman. Adam Coleman is an author, and he's the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing. He was born in Detroit, and he writes openly about the personal struggles with fatherlessness, homelessness, and masculinity. He's one of the strongest, and I would say one of the leading Black voices in the cultural debate today. Also, Adam Coleman is the author of Black Victim to Black Victor. He is also an op-ed writer and often writes in the New York Post, the Federalist, Newsweek, the Post Millennia, and the like. Adam Coleman and I have been following each other on Twitter, and I've actually had a few people recommend you come on the podcast. So this is going to be really great to finally have him on and have a conversation between two guys who kind of have the same background. And Adam, I'm very grateful that you can come on the podcast today. I'm really excited to speak with you.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. Did I get everything good in the introduction? Just want to make sure.
No, you're good.
Okay, cool. Well, like always, you begin the conversation with a cliche. Adam, besides what I briefly said, what are you all about, and how did you come to, because you really started to blow up. I mean, you've been on Fox News a whole bunch. You've been in recent press. Every time I see on Twitter, you're involved with something. You're always getting in trouble. So who is Adam Coleman, and, how did you come to be about in the current cultural conversations?
I would say it started in 2020. I wasn't a public person at all, really. I had a Facebook account that I barely used. I really only had it to communicate with family members and friends, probably like high school friends if need be, but I wasn't really a big fan of social media. And I really just kept to myself. I'm a relatively introverted person, although these days I'm doing extrovert things. But if I had my choice, I'd rather keep to myself, stay at home, and I enjoy it. That's what I'm comfortable with. But it was 2020, starting with COVID, and then finishing with George Floyd, where not only could you not ask questions about a vaccine, ask questions about a virus or anything like that, you weren't allowed to ask questions about the narratives surrounding George Floyd. You weren't allowed to challenge narratives that were being put on Black people. And there was only one narrative that was acceptable, and that was that we were victims, and that we're inherently victims, and there's nothing that we can do other than being victims, and that the biggest challenge in our life was racism. And I just thought back to my life and the life of many people who are Black that I know, and their biggest challenge wasn't racism or even white people getting in their way. And I wanted to write about it. So, I mean, the general portion of the book really just highlights the biggest issue facing Black Americans is family dysfunction. It's family disconnect. And I wanted to tell my story as a child who grew up without his father and how it impacted me. And I'm 39, but this is a few years ago when I started writing these, entering my late 30s and taking decades to kind of figure out why I had such a struggle, especially in my 20s, why I had so many hurdles and all these different things, and making the connection as far as everybody that I know that grew up with their father, a healthy father at least, didn't have these particular issues. And then I look at my son. I had my son at the age of 21, and I'm looking at my son entering his teenage years, and he is way ahead of where I was, right? And I've always been involved in his life to not be my father. And I started putting all of these things together, and I kind of wanted to talk about it, especially from a personal level within my book. So there's a lot of storytelling within the book. I wanted to stay in my own lane. I didn't want to be Thomas Sowell. I didn't want to be anybody else. I didn't want to be an intellectual giant, so to speak, and speak in really big words. I wanted to write well as someone who had no writing experience, but I know how to communicate with people. And I wanted to take it seriously, and I wanted to tell my story. It is a book that I am very proud of, and anyone who's read it, often they're shocked by it because they're expecting something different, and they're expecting a lot of black this and black that, but there's a little bit of black this and there's a lot of human this. There are times I'm talking about psychological elements. I'm talking about childhood behavioral patterns. I'm very interested in psychology, and while I don't know the terms, I know what it looks like. And I know the behavioral patterns, and I recognize these things. So I'm actually very proud, as someone who doesn't even have a college degree, I'm very proud that I've had multiple psychologists who have read my book and said, you're accurate.
That's
so
great.
Yeah, so I felt very good about that, especially after the fact, meeting people, and actually one of them is a friend of mine now. And she tells me, what you described here, it's called this. Like there are terms for this. And I was like, oh, okay, I just know what it looks like.
That's a real sign of intelligence when you genuinely, like from the bottom up, discover something and then it has a real life application. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So I wanted to encapsulate all of those things within this book. So I think the other way I kind of describe it to people is that the book is kind of a case study, right? There are some Black specific things that I'm talking about in there, the cultural elements. However, the meat of it is very much like it's a case study that you can replace Black and put whatever you want in there, and you see the behavioral patterns, you see the victim mentality, you see the struggle, you see the impacts on children who grew up without their father. And I've had people from other countries, from other cultures, read it and say, I know someone who went through that. I know someone who's like that, and they're not Black. And the last thing I'll say is, like, the most fascinating thing about doing all of this has been most of the people who relate to this book do not look like me. And that's been like the beauty of it. There's so many people who do not look like me. Most of them have been white, who have said, I went through that, or my nephew's going through that, and they're white. We have a lot of people who are being overshadowed because there's a greater narrative to try to, even the fatherlessness issue, only make it a Black American issue when it's actually an American issue. Nearly a quarter of children in America are growing up in separate homes from their fathers. And that is a major issue, especially because we're number one in the world with this problem.
Wow. So throughout the book, you talk about the victim mindset. What exactly is a victim mindset? I'll give you what I think it is, and then I want to know your opinion on it. Sure. So, and you mentioned psychologists have read the book. I'm actually a psych major, and I'm trying to get into the clinical route, so it's going to be interesting conversation. So, there was a paper, I forgot who it was by, but it was actually a paper trying to study the underlying science of victim or victim mindsets. And so what they did in this study, they had these two groups, and they made them both believe that some sort of problem happened to them. So the problem happened, and then both groups had an effect on both groups. One thing happened to this group, and another happened to the other group. So this is actually called the moral typecasting. So we often will think that what happened to us, something that happened to me personally, well, it affected me more. It's kind of like a branch off of narcissism, grandiosity, thinking that, well, I had special significance. Well, it really affected me. If I got denied from this one school, or this person didn't open the door for me, well, we tend to take it personally. Well, it's because of this, or it's because of this factor. And the interesting thing in the study was the bad thing that happened to the one group was actually the other group when all the numbers and data was calculated, the other group suffered more than the group that was complaining about suffering more. So the group that suffered more, on average, complained less than the group that didn't suffer more. And that findings was that was very interesting to me. And I forgot the name of it. I'll try to find it after this. But so the moral of the story there is what is really going on underneath the surface level. Why do we tend to victimize ourselves despite the actual reality? Now, I think a victim mindset comes from a place, a genuine place. It is, and you can even make a really strong case, an evolutionary case, that something happened to you specifically because you don't want to fail in the abstract. You want to make sure it's something about you. So if something happened to you, if someone denied you an opportunity, if someone perhaps was coarse with you in a conversation, you don't want to make it seem that, oh, well, it happened. Well, maybe they were just this, or maybe they were just that, or maybe they just had a bad day. You tend to want to make it about yourself, I think, in order so then you can possibly change something. That's how I think of it. Because if something just happened to you personally, or something happened to your group, maybe I made a mistake. You want to make sure that you often think that it happened to the group. And that's where our mind tends to go. But what you really want to do is you want to make it about yourself. So our mind goes to the group, especially if that's influenced by an ideology, but you want to make it as close to yourself as possible. So I think it goes to the group for one, to stave off that responsibility of changing something about yourself, or maybe or staving off introspecting of something that are maybe how you're acting in a situation. We tend to generalize it towards the group, just like in the former study I mentioned, so that we can not introspect and not see what we did wrong. So I think the victim mentality comes from a genuine place of not being able to understand or fit whatever happened, whatever the phenomena happened, fit it into our schema. What is going on? It has to be, well, what is it? And the most easiest thing, the low hanging fruit is, especially if it's influenced by an ideology, we'll get into that later. The low hanging fruit is, well, it had to be because I'm black, or it had to be because I'm this religion, or I'm this, or I'm part of this thing, or I said maybe this whatever this group I'm involved in. So I think it starts off from the group, and then that can get influenced by ideologies and all these in propaganda and whatever. And then once that belief is destroyed, there's nowhere else to go but to say, okay, maybe it's something that Adam did, maybe it's something that Kyle did. So that's how I think of the victim mentality. Is that similar to how you construe it?
Yeah, I was. No, it's okay. No, I would say that's very similar. I would say, because you asked for my kind of quick definition, I would say that a victim mentality is when your automatic assumption about something negative that happens in your life is because of something that you had no control over. And it is a mechanism to blame someone else for your outcome. It's not used to reflect upon yourself as to what you did. It must be, like, for example, if someone is rude to me at a grocery store, right? It must be because I'm Black, but I can't change being Black, right? So there's nothing for me to change. That person is the one who's in the wrong. But what if I actually did something that caused the reaction for that person to have a negative reaction, be rude to me? What if I was rude first and then they reacted to what I did, right? But I can't reflect onto my own behavior, my own actions, because I've put it onto something that I have no control over. So that, to me, that's part of like the victim mentality. It's never to reflect upon yourself as an individual. It's always to point blame at someone else for your own personal downfall, right? So, for example, if someone is poor, because I've been poor, so that's why I use this as an example. Actually, I'll go even to the personal. My mother, right? We're not supposed to do this, but I'll go to my mom.
Anything happens on a Kyle Maxwell podcast.
We were poor at times. We were homeless a couple times as a kid. And we struggled. We lived with family members. We were all over the place. But the question is, why were we poor? Right? And was it because the system put us in this situation? Was the white man holding us down? No. The real answer was that my mother had 2 kids with a married man, and she was never married to him. Like, these were choices that my mother made. And so single motherhood relegates you to the bottom of the income ladder, and it puts you automatically in a mode of struggle, because you not only have 1 child to feed, you have 2 children to feed, including yourself, and you change the dynamic, right? And now you're raising children, you're having to provide on 1 income because there's only 1 person to provide. And we don't count the $50, child support checks that were coming through. They don't mean anything. We're talking about real economic support just on that level. And this was based off of the choices that my mother made. And while she was young, she was in her early 20s when she was making these decisions. These are choices that she made. And it had nothing to do with her race, had nothing to do with any of that stuff. It was all within her control. And so I sort of talk about these things within my book. If I'm talking about the victim mentality, I have to criticize, right? So I'm reflecting on my life. I'm reflecting on my mother's actions, my father's actions, right? I don't make excuses. Like when you have a victor mindset, you stop making excuses, right? I always ask myself now that I've completely gone out of the victim mentality, I ask myself, what could I have done better in this situation, right? If I lose an opportunity, what could I have done better in that situation to not have lost that opportunity? So next time it doesn't happen again, right? If I had a failed relationship with an ex-girlfriend, I would say, okay, what did I do wrong in that relationship? So next time I don't do that with the next partner, right? So it's something that you automatically reflect upon yourself to make sure that you improve as an individual for the next situation that might come. But if you don't have that reflection, then everybody is at fault. Everybody's wrong. Society is wrong. Everybody is wrong except for you, right? It's a very narcissistic way to view the world, that no one does it right except for me. And any issue that has happened to me is because of someone else, and it lacks growth, and it holds people back. And from a cultural standpoint, because I think if you ask, like, if we're just being specific, let's say Black Americans, why does it exist? Why does this language exist amongst Black Americans? And it doesn't come from nothing, right? It actually comes from something, right? It comes from stories. It comes from tales. Why is someone who lives in this era talking about slavery, right? Well, it's because of stories. It's because of stories that are passed down, stories that we learn from history books. It comes from stories, and we find a relation to these stories because it appears to have been related to our demographic. So we relate to these stories. We weren't personally in bondage, right? But these stories travel to us. Now, how we take a story, how we interpret a story, that's a difference, a difference there. If you take that story, that something negative happened in the past, and use it as a way to inflict a victim mentality amongst someone or amongst the people, then that is how you're choosing to interpret it. But if you take that story and view it from an overcoming story, right, as a story of people who suffered but overcame that struggle, and now you are here, and that is why you are here, then that is a different way of interpreting that story. So I think much of the victor versus victim mindset has a lot to do with how we interpret stories. I wrote an article for the New York Post about Black History Month. I know on the right it is very much so like, get rid of Black History Month because there's only American history, and I understand where that comes from. However, when Black History Month was implemented, it was implemented, for one, by Black Republicans, right? It was a notable Black Republican who came up with Black History Month. And not Black History Month. I think it was a week. I think it was Black History Week at that point. And it was expanded under a Republican president, right? I believe it was Gerald Ford, if I remember correctly. It was expanded into a month. And his reasoning was, it's really important that we do not forget the accomplishments and the contributions of Black Americans, because it's not often talked about throughout history. And that is why it's important for us to just take this time to appreciate and learn more about the significant impacts of Black Americans in our society. It is not a requirement. No one gets tested, right? You don't. There's not a. You can't leave your house until you can recite all the Black people who did X, Y, and Z, right? It is a gesture, right? It is a positive gesture, but it comes from a place of recognizing struggle had happened, and while there was still struggle, many Black Americans accomplished things that were incredibly impactful for American society, for everyone. And it is a appreciation of people who, in the midst of unfairness, which we can say Jim Crow is unfair, by the way, unfair to everybody, right? But it is especially unfair for Black Americans because it was more so targeting Black Americans. It was unfair for these people, yet amongst that, they still benefited our society, and they still created things, they still invented things, and they still impacted our society in very beneficial ways. That is why we have Black History Month. And I think it's important to talk about it. And it is not to be used, which is actually what started happening, as Black History Month now becomes a weapon to bludgeon white people with, to look what you did to us, right? And it is not about that. It is to talk about the contributions of very specific people or who benefited our society, and to have appreciation. That's basically all it's supposed to be. But it's, like I said, how you interpret that story, what you're trying to use that story for. Is it to make people victims, or is it to show the victor mentality that exists amongst people who created amongst oppression?
Yeah. That I'm gonna ask you later why you think especially kids and students in colleges, college campuses now, because it's just running rampant, that kind of revenge seeking during the these holidays and these weeks. Every other year it's like some new week, we have a new holiday, it's Juneteenth and all the stuff coming up. But I absolutely agree with that about, like you said, when you go and introspect yourself, is when you put it on you, that is where Like, aside from, even if you were wrong, this is something I don't think that a lot of people who are in this framework of thinking, I don't think that they quite understand that they can be right about every single one of their presuppositions. That the white man is an evil tyrant who was made in some lab and mixed with different races until a whiter one came out, not to point any religions out, and that the system, every system, the libraries, the schools, your local gas station is against you. Every single industry is all corroborating in the most evil and egregious way to hold you down financially, spiritually, at the gym, anything is holding you down. Even the vending machines are holding you down. Everything. They could be right about every single thing of their absurd presuppositions. Now the question is, two questions. What the hell are you going to do about it if all these institutions and people and people of power are against you? And two, what are you willing to do to eradicate this problem? See, when you construe the problem as this is something pertaining to my group, it instantaneously fluctuates into this enormous problem that can no longer be fixed. When you look at things, Jordan Peterson had this great quote, and this is something now, because it was around 2020. It was that year. This was the video that brought me out of wokeness. I tweeted this about the black square and everything, and went completely crazy on Twitter. He said that there are more differences within groups than between groups. In the fundamental group, or you can compartmentalize groups and identities and all these things down to the single individual. There are more differences within the group than between groups. And once I understood that, I was like, that actually makes a whole lot of sense, because I've been around black people a whole lot in my life, and yes, we had the same level of skin pigment. I mean, yes, okay. Obviously, we all lived in the same place and the demographics or whatever, but some of them are athletes, some of them read, some of them had high verbal ability, some of them didn't, some of them like this, some of them like that, some of them were mixed with whatever, Somalian, some of them were from Haiti. Like there was so much diversity. And if you just take a look, they're all killing each other, shooting each other. We have the highest intraracial murder rate in the United States. What is going on there? Especially you go in places like Chicago. I mean, we don't even have to really get into that. There's more differences. I mean, that's what how do you explain gang violence? How do you explain I hate using this term, gun violence? If there's more differences between groups than within groups, then why is our particular group has the highest interracial murder rate in the United States? If all of us are quote unquote getting along, it doesn't make any sense. So when you construe your life as, well, this group here and we have this group over there, I was like, okay, well, what do we have left? You resort to mob violence, mob rule. Well, my group, all of us utter this, and that group utters this one. Okay, well, what are we going to do now? Sit here and fight to what? So, and you can be right about whatever it is that you're complaining about. You can be right about that, even though you're wrong, but you can be right. But the point here is, when you construe your life and you construe even besides race, when you construe problems by the group, period, you are limiting yourself with your possible solutions. And it's just not practical. It's just not smart to construe life that way, period. So even if you're right about whatever is besetting you, I don't think that's something that I think people don't understand. So I want to play devil's advocate here. Someone who is maybe still more towards the liberal left side is hearing you and saying, okay, Adam, I understand Black History Month, and it's about understanding all these things that great Black Americans did, and they say I understand that it's about maybe I can look at myself and see what I need to do, what Kyle Maxwell needs to do, but you're overlooking the historical trauma that was inflicted upon us. That here goes that word. You're overlooking the economical and the socio-economical aspects of this. Kids in lower funded communities, their schools are further away. Kids who are living in urban areas, they have less resources. They have less access to hospitals, less access to basic human needs. The average household, which is a horrible statistic, by the way. Thomas Sowell had a great interview about that. The average household income of Black Americans is significantly lesser in the United States. You're looking over all the statistical obstacles that are getting in the way of us. So what would you say to someone listening to this who thinks that you're overlooking the problems in order to look at yourself and introspect about yourself? So, and I'm asking you two questions. So the first question is, where do you think that person's coming from when they hear you speaking and they read your book and they know everything you're about and they think that you're just talking like Uncle Tom? And second, where do you think the line is between understanding the actual historical traumas and the historical problems that actually do beset us? Where's the line between acknowledging those but moving on towards the future and not letting it stop you?
I have a thing about, I just want anybody and everybody to do things in spite of. So yeah, exactly. To do things in spite of those obstacles. It doesn't mean that you'll surpass those obstacles, but you have no choice but to, if they exist. And I also kind of use like an analogy when you're on an airplane. When your mask drops, right, what do they tell you to do? They tell you to put your mask on first before you put on someone else's. And I think the way that people have to understand it is the reason you're supposed to take personal responsibility and fix your issues is because once your issues are fixed, then you'll be strong enough to help other people fix their problems. And by waiting and hoping for someone else to fix everyone's problem, right? Let's say if we were to use like the racial thing and say the white man did X, Y, and Z to us, right? All right, so the white man who did X, Y, and Z to us, you expect that person to fix your problems? Does that make any sense? Right? So when people come to me and say, Black people should support other Black people and fix Black people's problems, I don't really have a problem with that. If that's the if that's the way that you think that will ultimately result in the problem being fixed, so be it. Fix your own problems. I'm fine with that. Actually, the funniest, and it gave me the biggest headache, but the funniest live stream that I did was with someone who had Black people from different viewpoints, some hoteps, some more conservative. It was kind of all over the place. But there was a guy I guess he was more hotep, and he came on and he was very like a scowl on his face, and like he was ready to tell me, like, yeah. And I was like, okay. And like just the same way I'm talking to you is how I talk to everybody. I talk to people like I want to be talked to. And I have the same tone, same demeanor. So he comes on, he was like, yeah, well, Black people need to take care of themselves and build up their own stuff and do X, Y, and Z. But he's saying it in a way like he thinks, like he's telling me off, like I'm wrong. And so he goes in this whole diatribe. And when he finishes, I say, I agree with you. And he's like, yeah, but what you're not understanding is
And you just hear his dashiki like scuffling in the microphone.
right. Like he couldn't grasp that I actually agree with what he is saying. If it requires that other people if a group of people uplift themselves instead of relying on the government and waiting for other people to fix their problems, then I am all for it. To me, that is a victor mentality, where if you believe that you can uplift yourself and help uplift other people alongside you, then that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. But this goes to you were asking about the Uncle Tom thing. There's nothing I can do about that. If someone calls me Uncle Tom, I laugh. If someone calls me a coon, I laugh. Because ultimately, this is like shaming language, and it can only work if you believe it. It can only work if you accept what they're saying as to be true, and I know who I am, and I know where I stand. And oftentimes, the people who call you coons and Uncle Toms have no idea what you've done or said.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's double-digit vocabulary.
Yeah.
Double-digit IQ vocabulary.
Right. They might see you standing next to X person. They have no idea what you said or done or read your stuff. They want to believe what they believe, right? And they want to rationalize their initial thought about you in any way possible and ignore all the stuff that you said. So at no point do I ever say I hate Black people. Do I slander Black people? I criticize just like I criticize anybody and everybody. In my book, I criticize my mom and my father, right? I criticize everybody. But I do it because I care. And I think that's the difference. There are people who criticize because they don't care. And you can see that coming from a mile away. And I understand. But not everybody who criticizes from a place of hatred, of malice. I criticize because I actually care. And I think for a lot of people, they don't grasp that there's two different areas of criticisms. So when I criticize, I care because I want things to change. I want things to get better. Even from a selfish standpoint, I want Black people to do better because I'm Black, and the imagery of Black people doing better actually benefits me too, right? Yeah. So even from a selfish standpoint, I want Black people to do better.
There's room for group identity. There's room for a group identity.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll tell you, if I could tell you just one quick story.
Cool. Go ahead.
I won't give too many details, but there's someone who's in my life, and they don't like my politics. Perfectly fine. However, the problem is they don't know my politics, right? And in person, they never address my politics. They don't argue with me. They don't talk to me about it. They completely avoid having actually a political discussion to even understand what my politics are. So, but this person will talk to everybody else but me about my politics. And one time they were talking to my wife, and they were saying that I say X, Y, and Z. So I said, you know what? Send them this article, which in the article, I'm clearly sticking up for Black people, right? Because I'm saying in this article, it is very insulting when someone does this and someone feels this particular way about Black people, assuming they are incapable of doing X, Y, and Z, right? That is my general message within that article. You know what the person says? Well, they're leaving out this, and they're not talking about this, and they're only saying this to cater to a white audience. See, at that point, there is nothing I can tell you.
There's nothing you can do with that.
There's nothing I can do about that. You want to believe what you want to believe. But the fascinating part is that person will never tell me this to my face. As someone who's done, I don't know how many interviews, been on television, written countless articles, I know exactly how I feel about things, and I know exactly how to communicate these things to people who agree with me and disagree with me. And I know, I like the other thing people don't understand is when you're in the circle, you know stuff that other people don't know. Like, I'm not trying to name drop, but like I could text Vivek Ramaswamy right now, right? I just know him by chance, and he's someone that I support as a human being, and I think he's a good guy. But most people can't do that, right? So if I have a question generally about Vivek, for example, I know how to reach out to people on his team. Same thing for the DeSantis team. I can reach out to the DeSantis team. So I know things. I've had conversations with DeSantis press secretary, right? I say, hey, by the way, this is going around. Is this true? And they're like, no, that's not true. Here's the documentation. All right, cool. Or did DeSantis really say this? No, they didn't say this. All right, cool. Thank you for letting me know. Now I'm informed. Most people can't do that. So when I have an opinion about something, it is actually an informed opinion, politically speaking, right? Because I do this all day long. And a lot of people can't understand that who are not within the circle. They think from a place of assumption and getting a bits of information that they might read from here and read from there. And I can talk directly to the source. And they don't understand that. So I think that's why he won't talk to me about it. Because, it's like if you're a professional basketball player and there's a guy who talks shit about you playing ball. He's like, I could kick his ass in ball. I was like, but that guy never comes to the court and I'm here.
Yeah.
And he won't play me, but he still thinks he's better than me.
He's making I would look at that as it's an aesthetic judgment, not really a judgment of what it actually is. He's just, people like that who are, you can't, I'm not trying to talk about this person I don't know, but you can't fix stupid, and you can't argue with someone about a particular topic because especially something of importance, because it just requires too many virtues and too many virtues that if you had the virtues, then you wouldn't hold those beliefs to begin with. One of my favorite quote by Socrates, "The unexamined life is unworth living." And something that I admire about Socrates is every single belief that he had, that he wanted to make you don't make your beliefs stronger by holding on to them. That's not how you make a belief stronger. You make a belief stronger by testing it and trying to prove it false. A scientific hypothesis, even a belief, a belief that can't even demonstrably be proven. Any presupposition you have, you don't make your belief stronger by applying more emotion to it, or applying more faith, or applying more emotion and more drive to it. You make it stronger by stress testing it, putting it out there. And to have a belief is to act it out. And this is when you said something about you criticize because you care. I think it's impossible. Then you said sometimes people criticize things they don't care about, and I'll push back against that because I don't think it's possible to criticize or orient your attention to something that you don't value. I think it's impossible on many different levels, but we're just speaking like in the layman terms. I think it's impossible to orient your attention towards something that you don't value. And I think it's important that people understand and they pay attention to what is drawing their attention, what is grabbing their attention, why is this particular problem besetting you and not this one, or why is what that person said bothering you but not this one. And the thing is, the reason why you don't laugh when people call you a coon, or people call you an Uncle Tom, or people say this inset or this insult or this epithet towards you, because it's not true. And something can't be funny if it isn't true. And that's why people like that will never confront you. They would rather hold on to the belief. And the anger and the drive is slowly starting to manifest, and it will never be able to leave the host of the belief, it's because it simply isn't true. And that's where I think a lot of the anger comes from. And that's where all of that anger and resentment and this kind of angst comes from, those radical types, because they hold something to be true. But that's all that they can do. They don't have truth. All they can do is hold something to be true. And the closer it gets towards that line of possibly being able to be demonstrably proven wrong, that's where the anxiety comes from. The sense of not being in control. That's one of the number one tells that someone is in an anxious state, because they're trying to be in control of something that they're not in control of. So I really think that is it's a really good practice to understand what are you drawing your attention to. Why is this problem upsetting you? Because there has to be something true about it, or else you wouldn't orient your attention towards it at all. And I think that sometimes when we say, like, why don't you pull your pants up or something, dude? Or like, why are these black people over here like acting this way? Why are they being loud? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Not to make stereotypes, but the only reason, if you knew deep down inside that you weren't X, you weren't this, you weren't a criminal, you're doing good by yourself, you go on about your day. It wouldn't affect you. The reason why you get mad and the reason why you get so visceral at things that are said to you online, or even things that an actual racist person is saying to you, because you believe it. You believe that about yourself. You think that white people are better than you. You think that you cannot get yourself out of that situation. You actually think that you are worth less because you're black. And I think that is the deeper problem. It is a deeper emotional problem that is truly besetting these people, and then it manifests into philosophies, into critical theory, into academic circles, into DEI, these presuppositions that punctuality is a byproduct of whiteness. Are you fucking serious, dude? So to be on time is associated with a level of melanin in someone's skin? Or are you really saying that you suck with time because you're black? Like, what are you really saying? I think if people to even be able to examine your beliefs that way, if you were able to do so, you wouldn't hold those beliefs to begin with. So I think that's a very valuable point. Now I want to make a segue here. I want to go back in time to 2020, and back when George Floyd and all the riots and stuff were going out. And I won't go on my story because that'll take up the rest of the time. But during, when people were in the streets and people were, Antifa was going crazy and all these things on the news, that's all you were hearing about. Just 2 seconds ago, there was like a deadly virus that was attacking you. And then the next day, it was like a race war. I remember this like it was yesterday. What kind of things were going on through your mind when you were seeing all these people like and these groups attack people outside just trying to enjoy a sandwich? Like what was going on through your mind when you were looking at all this?
Like aspects of our country were having a panic attack. I felt like the gates were opened when it came to the college activists. I've been watching the culture war by that point a year or two. I started getting more and more into watching, different podcasts and understanding like certain things that were going on. I remember watching like the Rubin Report, and they would show like some crazy thing that was said on campus, right? So it always felt confined to the campus, right? We know now that there are drips of it that were happening in our society for quite a while, but as far as what became like to the surface, appeared to be like a clip here, a clip there, some radical feminists here, some leftists saying something crazy here, right? But it seemed confined to the institution. But then I just started seeing these people. It's like if you ever see like a crazy situation where the animals get out of a zoo, Videos of it, and it's like that's what it felt like. It was like the animals got out of the zoo. Like they were supposed to be caged up at colleges and arguing amongst themselves and virtually signaling amongst themselves. And now they're yelling in someone's face about if they support Black lives. And most of them are white. That was made it even more bizarre. But like,
yeah.
so like it was crazy from that standpoint that they were out and about. The animals have broken loose from the zoo, and now they're harassing people who are just going about their day, just trying to have a meal outside, trying to get some groceries, trying to drive down the street, and they're blocking it. Like, that's what it felt like to me. And when I say animals, I'm not trying to dehumanize them. They're people. Like, and I understand where they're coming from. I'm just giving like an analogy that these are people who it felt like they weren't supposed to actually be there, but here they were given a purpose, and now they were given an allowance, right, to actually mobilize and do the things that they were doing. And then after that, you started seeing the corporatization of it as well. Whenever you start seeing corporate backers for for social movements, now you know that there's a problem, right? You started seeing corporate backers. They are no longer the outliers, right? You're getting corporate backing for Black Lives Matter, right? Giving tens of millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter, for example, and to all these different leftist organizations. You are the mainstream at that point. And that's what it felt like. I'm watching the culmination of a bunch of things. That's how I.
Jack Dorsey, when he was a CEO at the time, donated $10 million to Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Where did it go?
Yeah.
Where did it go?
Well, we know where it went. Nowhere useful. I mean, that's ultimately how I felt watching these scenarios. But from on a personal level, I was slightly worried because at the time I was living an hour north of New York City. Wow. And, there was a little bit of fear, like, is that going to start coming up over here?
Yeah.
And I was a little bit worried for a couple of days, like, especially like when the New York riots were kicking off. I was a little bit worried, and I was worried for she was my girlfriend at the time, not my wife, but I was worried about our safety. But outside of that, that kind of subsided. Oh.
Good.
Oh, shoot. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I had something running in the background, and someone started talking in my ear, and I was like, what is that?
Conversation being fast.
That threw me so off. I'm sorry about that. We'll edit there. But I will say 2020 happened. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely something that felt real to me because it wasn't that far away. And on top of that, my wife was working in Manhattan at the time. So, that was worrisome. And I think for me, the biggest part that started happening was that I felt like I wasn't allowed to say stuff, right? The choice of not talking.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but at that time, were you, because my story was a little different, I was actually more leaning towards the left. I was the one believing it. So at that time in 2020, were you already an open thinker, or were you leaning more towards the left? Where were you at that time?
I was more of an open thinker at that point.
So always?
No, not always. I was transitioning.
Well, congratulations, man.
No, I was a Democrat. I was never woke. In many ways, I'm pretty much the same person, but a little bit different in some areas. But I was very much so a moderate, right? And I'm still a moderate to this day. I just disassociated myself from the Democrat Party. But I was a Democrat. I followed mainstream media. What they said was truth. because they said it was true. And as you see, like I'm good at being analytical. I'm an IT guy by trade. So, you have to be analytical. You troubleshoot. I troubleshoot for a living. So, you're trying to figure out problems and look at patterns and how this works, how it doesn't work.
I would say that you analyze and troubleshoot people as well. I don't think criticizing is. I think you are more of an analyst and then troubleshooting. I think that's more of a practical term to use rather than, I don't think you criticize your mother or your parents or people or people's belief. I think you analyze it and then you stress test it. It's more of a better way of looking at it.
Yes, I do. In the book, I do lay a little bit of judgment for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why I say I criticize, because I do get some judgment, but I am analyzing. You're right. I'm doing both. But I guess what I'm getting at is I was analyzing one perspective, right? So I was really good at analyzing that perspective. So I understood all the talking points. I understood all the motives, the initiatives, all these different things. I understood it very well. But you only understand the information that you're being provided, right? And it's with the assumption that all the information you're provided is true. Yep. And is without bias, and that there's no other angles to it. And it was realizing that I'm not getting all the information. I've told the story before. I met someone randomly in a pub in Madrid when I was traveling. Yep. And he became a friend of mine. We communicated. We actually connected over football, like European football. I'm really into that. And
what team?
I'm a Chelsea fan.
That was my first team. Wow, that's great. When Didier Drogba was playing, that was years ago. Cool.
Yeah, Drogba got me into Chelsea, and that just went from there. Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I've seen Chelsea play twice at Stamford Bridge. Oh, yeah,
jealous now.
And actually, I've seen Barcelona play at Camp Nou, and I went to Santiago Bernabeu last year.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Wow, cool, man. It's great.
Yeah. So I got one more that's on my bucket list to see Borussia Dortmund play. I was supposed to go actually in 2020, quite literally the day after Trump put in the travel ban was when we were supposed to fly out to go and see all these games. And one of them was, it was Dortmund versus Schalke, but that's a whole other story. We don't have to get into football. But he's the guy I met that was in Spain. He's actually British. He's a British conservative from Manchester. So at the time, he was telling me that he was for Brexit. And I said, that's weird. In my head, I'm saying, like, I thought Brexit for these racist British people, right? That's the narrative that they told you. They only want Brexit because they don't want these brown people, these foreigners coming in, stuff like that. So I asked him, I was like, why are you for Brexit? And he told me the United States would never allow an outside governing body to tell it what to do. And I said, that makes sense, because we wouldn't, right? To have this large bureaucratic body, the European Union, tell them how many fish they can have, or how many people you need to bring in as refugees, and how you do this and how you do that, when they have no investment in your country and your borders at all. They're just some foreign bureaucratic body who's arbitrarily telling you what to do, made up of people from all over the European Union. Like, we wouldn't want that. And from that point on, we kind of went on like an intellectual journey together. We took in audiobooks. I learned more about conservatism, libertarian thought. And he actually introduced me to Thomas Sowell. And I had never heard of Thomas Sowell prior to him. And just becoming more and more open and realizing, like, I could be wrong about a whole bunch of things. I know half the truth, let's just say. I know one perspective. Let me learn about these other perspectives. And so that's kind of what I did. And I just went on kind of like a personal intellectual journey by myself, where I just started consuming all types of media. I learned more about Trump. I didn't like Trump, and I learned more about him. And I learned things that I didn't realize that happened, like the good people on both sides. I didn't realize that there was an earlier portion of that where he says, you know, I don't like these white supremacists. They should be condemned, right? They always left that part out and assumed good people on both sides. And that was actually like a really big wake-up call to realize how manipulative the media is, because they purposely left that part out. And they would show, I remember watching it as a Democrat, watching mainstream media show that clip over and over, and they never referenced that. They always assumed that that never happened before. And they did that for years. And for me, I'm like, if they can lie to me about one thing for 2 years, then what else can they lie to me about? And that's where I was like, you know what? I need to hear what Donald Trump says from his mouth. I need to hear what Republicans are saying from their mouth. I need to hear what conservative media is actually saying, right?
That's interesting. Now I want to interrupt you, but the inner like psychology of me wants to understand why you went from that crucial moment when you realized that you had that moment that the media was giving you just one side of what the truth is, why that led you to wanting to go towards the other side and further investigate and see what was going on over there. Because one of the things that's common, and then you see this in the Hotep, in the more radical and literally driving towards anarchy way of thinking, is that the whole system as itself and become a revolutionary must come down. Because most things, because where most people go is they go from, okay, well, if one person's lying about this thing, then this whole thing must be a lie. All of these people are working together, and I'm being played. I'm being hacked. This whole entire thing must come to an end. This is something that Nietzsche wrote about. Was one of my favorite philosophers. He wrote about this in his book Will to Power. He said it went from God is good to everything is false. Not let me go check out what's going on over here so I can have an accurate idea of what's really going on. So I'm curious, why do you think you didn't fall victim to the nihilistic abyss of everything is false and this whole thing must go down? Both sides are lying. Both sides are actually really friends and I'm being played. Why didn't you go down that abyss? Why did you intellectually go to the other side and then stress test both sides? Why didn't you fall in that abyss, do you think?
Well, for one, I'm typically an optimist. It's hard for me to go down the nihilistic route outside of myself. So like when you're depressed, your depression is about you, right? And you can be nihilistic about you as an individual. But as far as like the world around them, I've never been that person. I very much so live my life seeing the world in an individualistic way in segments. So like CNN could be lying to me, but like how often is CNN lying to me? Are they lying to me about 50% of the things? Well, then CNN isn't lying about everything. Well, they have a lean. So then, you know, if CNN says, hi, we're CNN, we have a left-wing lean, then I'd be like, okay, cool. But they weren't disclosing that they have a lean, right? I'm thinking this is just truth. And so I have a real hard time, even to this day. I have a really, really hard time, and I try my best to pull people out of the, they lied to me one time about this one thing, or let's say they lied to you 5 times about 5 things. So everything that they say is wrong. That's not how it works. Like sometimes people lie about very particular things because it benefits them to lie about particular things. But the other stuff they're saying are true. Like some news story about this person breaking a record, that's factual. This person broke a record, right? They wouldn't make up this person breaking a record. It is what it is. CNN reports on all different types of stuff. So like, I wanted to know more, because then from that point, I realized that they have a lean. And so they're lying because they have a lean and they don't like Trump. And Trump is their boogeyman. So if they have a lean in one direction, what's the lean in the other direction? And actually, to kind of to go back, actually, I didn't immediately just go to the right and watch their content. I actually went to the left and watched their content. So for months, I was watching progressive media. I tried watching Young Turks. I can't watch it. It's not watchable. But I got into Jimmy Dore. I started watching Jimmy Dore, and actually I still watch Jimmy Dore to this day, because many of the things that he is saying are very interesting and true, right? Even as someone who is probably more right-leaning to this day, he is absolutely right. I'm still anti-war. I'm still pro-free speech. I've always been these things. And so he is coming from, as he would put it, a real progressive, a real lefty position. But the lefty position is that the very party that they've entrusted themselves with, the Democrat Party, is not the Democrat Party. They are something else, right? They, in his words, they are a right-wing party. But he talks about all these different things. He talks about all the corruption, right? No one should be for corruption, but he talks about the corruption. These are things that I would never have heard about otherwise, right? Things that are factual, right? Just like we talk about CNN. Sometimes CNN, they have different reporters talk about these things. They just don't highlight it, but they're available on their website. People just don't look for it, right? A lot of outlets, a lot of mainstream outlets report on a ton of different things. It's just what is brought to the forefront. What's the headline, right? And people don't realize that they actually produce a lot of content that is rather benign, not heavily leaning in one direction. But if it's about Trump, you know this is going to be a lean, right?
Yeah.
You know they're going to hit the keywords. If it's about race, they're going to hit the keywords. There's going to be a lean, right? So it's about finding the nuance in between there. But
you taken a personality test?
have I taken a what?
Have you ever taken a like a Myers-Briggs personality test?
A personality test, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you seem, because that's openness to experience. You seem extremely open, but earlier in the you said you're doing extroverted things, but that's a very extroverted, it's a very like high in openness trait to want to further seek and understand and get a actual grasp of something rather than just look at where the news and where it's just leaning towards. That's really interesting that instead of going directly to the right, you went further, not like politically, but you seeked further to the left to get a better grasp of everything that they were talking about. I find that's very smart. I mean, that's very sophisticated that you did that, because most people will take in this. It's a depressive mode of thinking that, well, this person lied, they're lying about everything. They automatically abstract the problem to the biggest conception they can think. We're lying about everything, and they go to the right in retaliation. They go to the right in spite. But you did something really unique, and you went further to the left and you further investigated. So I just think that's remarkable that you did that.
Thank you. The reason being is that so there's two things to kind of understand. I'm an IT guy, but like I say this in a good way. I'm a nerd, right? I nerd out. If I find
nerds are cool now, man. You haven't got the news. We're cool now.
I guess. If I find something interesting, like I listen to electronic music, but like if I get really into a particular genre, I learn all types of stuff. I learn about the DJ artist, where he's from, whether he's alive or dead, the origin of this music, where it came from. Like I get all into it if I'm into something, and I just nerd out with it. And I'll, like, my wife is like, how do you know all this different stuff? Like I got into cars and I started nerding out with cars. You know, I started learning about all these different things. And when you come out of it, you just kind of have like a wide range of information, a wide range of knowledge, because you're just curious. So I just had general curiosity. And what I realized was that politics was the one area that I did not have curiosity about. I just turned on the news. I watched Morning Joe. And I thought I was being informed because I didn't know any better. And what I realized was that I'm not being curious like I am about everything else. If I want to know about a particular country, like I just start researching the country like I do with anything else. So why am I not doing that with politics? So that's why I was like, if I'm on the left, let me learn more about the left. Let me go farther left. Let me just learn about them. Didn't mean that I agreed or thought they were right about everything. I was just listening to what they had to say, how they were making arguments, where their stances were. Did it make sense? Are they right about these things? And then I did that for months, like Kyle Kalinske, Jimmy Dore, a little bit of Young Turks, Crystal Ball. Like I just listened to all these different independent progressive YouTubers and podcasts. And then I said, okay, well, let me listen to conservatives and let me listen to some libertarians. And I started going down that. I used to listen to Ben Shapiro almost daily. I would listen to Stephen Crowder. I would listen to all these different conservative voices to see what their perspective was. And what coming to a point where I was like, okay, I understand the typical Democrat position. I understand the progressive position. I understand the libertarian position, and I understand the conservative position. Now, what makes sense to me? And so now I can make my own choices.
That's very smart, man.
Yeah. And what I find is, if I'm to put myself on a spectrum, I am moderate, but I'm moderate to the right. What I find is that on the right, they often don't know the stances of people on the left. They assume certain things, right? But they have no idea. They can't tell me why a progressive would want this particular policy, right?
Yeah.
Or their motives behind it. They have no idea what you're saying. And also, oftentimes, the left is right about the problem. They're wrong about the solution.
You guys see why everyone hates this guy?
Right.
Oh
So that,
yeah.
right. Or if they're right about a problem, but they're wrong about the prevalence of the problem.
Of the intentions.
Right? Or the intentions about the problem. Right. So they're sometimes sort of right. And then on the right, they're not always right either. And actually this year, 2023, has been a year of I would say 2022 was, between 2021 and 2022 was, yes, doing the typical, I was on the left, now I'm on the right, I'm criticizing the left, I'm writing about the left. However, the longer I'm in this ecosystem, I'm a people watcher. So I'm watching people, I'm watching what people say, I'm watching the rhetoric. And I'm saying, why are you guys making this type of argument? That's a dumb argument. That doesn't help you. Even though you're right, you're hurting yourself by making this argument. Why are they ignoring this? Because actually the left is right about this. Why are they advocating for this? Is dumb, right? And 2023 has been a year of me criticizing the right from a place of caring, because I think the right has the right solutions to most problems. They just have terrible rhetoric, right? And I'm trying to be a voice of good rhetoric, of good arguments. And I'm just looking at the flaws. And I'm saying, if I want the political right to be better, because I think it is beneficial for America to have two functioning political aisles, right? That are advocating for people, that wants both political parties to succeed and compete for votes, because ultimately that's what it comes down to. Then the right actually needs to get better at their game. And I know it's just me, I'm just one guy, but I'm trying to do something to highlight, like, guys, this doesn't work. When you explain it this way, when you talk about it this way, it doesn't work. Here's what you're ignoring, right? I'm trying to actually bring compassion to the right, to the political right, because I think often they reward harsh, I'm not a snowflake, I'm gonna say it how it is. And guess what? You turn people off, even though you're right. And they don't understand that even though you're right, you can be wrong at the same damn time.
It's a beautiful place to end, man. That was great. Adam, I just want to, commend you for your, and also we didn't get to talk about the weight loss journey, but you also lost, I believe it was 50 pounds.
No, 70.
70. Sorry. I'm undercutting you. Trying to take your credit away. 70 pounds, man. So I mean, that's also very good. your Socratic humility. That's just kind of what I've been getting from you this entire time. Commend you from just being able to dip yourself into different politics and to expose yourself to different ideas without losing your sense of self. That's just the hallmark of just the Socratic intelligence and humility. So you're doing great things, and I appreciate you coming on the show. Where can people find out more about you, and where can they get more information?
Substack.com. We have Wrong Speak Publishing, where we're publishing opinion articles. We just got into book publishing, and we've been doing actual journalism for the past 6 months now. So we have news articles that we publish somewhere between 3-4 days a week on the news side, and we're expanding. 2024, I'm hoping to have 5 days a week. We have one deep dive news article. We are trying to be, I don't like saying centrist. We're trying to be open-minded. We're trying to talk about things that other people aren't talking about. We're not trying to do clickbait. We're not trying to talk about trans stuff all day long just to talk about trans stuff because it gets a reaction. We're trying to be meaningful and purposeful about the stories that we're talking about, and give our journalists opportunities to choose stories that they're passionate about, as well as we have opinion articles written by people that they're passionate about these opinion articles, and giving them an opportunity to be heard. So I have my mini revolution of common sense, moderate thinkers, and journalists who want an opportunity to have a platform to be heard. And I am very blessed to be running this organization to try and help uplift their voices. So we take submissions from regular people all the time. If you want to write something, reach out to us, and we'll talk about it.
That was great, man. Well, I wish you much luck, man, and keep on doing what you're doing. You're making a really great impact, and I think you serve as a good example for people who are maybe trying to take a path similar to yours, and they don't know which way to go. You're setting a really great example. So thank you again for coming on the show, Adam. Hope you have a great day.
You too. It's my pleasure.